Calder places his hand on a 200-year-old altar and speaks words he has never been taught. And the entity beneath the island answers with a force that shakes the stone and drops Drest to his knees. What the ground cost. Part 4 of 4. Calder had 5 days to do the impossible and 1 day to accept what the impossible would cost. The group in the engineering chamber. Drest, the woman whose name was Sora, and the man who said only that he had once served the engineering corps before the palace made serving it complicated, had a plan. It had 3 parts, and Calder did not like any of them. The first part confirmed the exact altitude. Sora's bandage hand was from the last measurement attempt. Something on the underside had responded to their instruments. She had kept both fingers. She had not kept the feeling in them. The measurement confirmed 411 feet. They had miscalculated. They had 5 days, not 6. The second part: find and disable the mechanism the faction within the palace had used to accelerate the descent. This meant going into the palace's deep mechanical quarter, into rooms that required authorizations Calder did not have, and that Drest could no longer safely use. The man with no name turned out to have several. He moved through locked doors the way Calder moved through footnotes. With the confidence of someone who had done it so many times it had become invisible. They found the acceleration mechanism on the 3rd day. It was not what any of them expected. It was not a machine. It was a room, a circular chamber, deep in the palace's mechanical quarter, lined with the oldest stonework Calder had ever seen. Older than the palace, older than the island's official founding year, which he now understood was a fabricated date. At the center of the room was an altar, and on the altar was a binding. Not the accord, a second binding, older and simpler. A request, written in Vossin, addressed to the entity below. Someone had already been communicating with it. Someone had already been negotiating. And the communication was recent. The ink was dry, but the stone beneath it was still warm. The third part of the plan was the part that no one had said aloud until that moment. Because saying it aloud would have required someone to volunteer for it before they understood what they were agreeing to. Drest said it now. He said the only way to re-anchor the binding without the altitude component is to have the bloodline anchor consciously renew it, not passively, the way Calder's existence had always sustained it, deliberately, with full knowledge of what he was accepting. He said it does not kill you. He paused, which was worse than if he had not paused. He said it changes the nature of what you are. The entity would not come through Calder as a door, but it would be aware of him permanently. It would know him the way it knew the deep stone, as a surface it could press against, always. He would feel it. Always. Calder asked what happened if he refused. Sora answered before Drest could. She said, we find another way to stop the descent. We have 2 days. It is possible. It is just not probable. She said possible the way doctors say possible when they mean unlikely. He had 2 choices. Accept the renewal, the permanent conscious binding of his mind to something ancient and vast and not human, or refuse it, and spend 2 days trying to stop the mechanical descent of an island by 4 people with no institutional authority while the palace faction hunted them. He chose. He went to the center of the circular chamber, to the altar, and he set his hand on the old stone. The language came. He had not expected that he would know how. But the Vossian words arrived fully formed, in his own voice, in his own cadence, as if he had been speaking them in his sleep for 27 years without knowing it. The entity answered, not in sound, in pressure. It pressed against the binding the way a tide presses against a seawall. Not to break it, to test whether Calder meant it. He held it, pressed harder, he held. It pressed hardest of all, and the chamber shook, and the amber fractures in the old stone flared vivid gold. And Sora grabbed the door frame and Drest dropped to one knee, and the man with no name stood very still in the way of someone who had already made his peace. And then the pressure stopped, not retreated. Stop, a stillness that was not absence. It was acknowledgement. The entity had heard him, it had tested him and found the anchor genuine, the binding renewed. The island in the hours that followed slowed, not dramatically, not all at once, but by dawn on the fifth day, the altitude instruments showed 417 feet. They were rising, barely, but rising. The palace faction was found, eventually, by people with more authority and fewer scruples than Calder, and he chose not to ask what found meant in that context. Dressed retired in the truest sense. To a quiet room with morning light and no locked wards nearby. Sora went back to the engineering corps with a promotion no one was supposed to know about. The man with no name went back to having no name. Somewhere the palace's long reach was slightly shorter. Calder returned to the archive. He sat at his desk. He opened the record he had always maintained. He began, for the first time in his career, to write the true version. His hand was steady. Beneath the island, something vast and ancient and patient pressed very gently against the edges of his mind, the way the sea presses against the shore, not to break it, not to flood it, just to remind the shore that the sea has not forgotten where it ends. He wrote. He did not stop. That's it for part 4. Follow Untold Lores for part 1 of our next story. Like and subscribe for daily stories.